So while I'm getting mic'd up, I think I recognize a few people from last year, which is super nice to see. Yeah, so I was going to say I taught a few of the classes for this sort of data science training last year, and I did sort of introductory visualization, Excel, some text visualization, topic finding stuff, and really like because I like librarians like text visualization, if you could parse that. I would have loved to have talked about that today, but I didn't have time to write a new talk specifically. So what I'm going to do is give a talk that I'm giving. It's a short form of a tutorial I'm doing. Oh, now I figured it out. It took me this whole time to figure this out. It's the short form of a tutorial I'm doing in New York in a couple of weeks for lots of money, actually.
You can hold it.
Can I hold it? Well, but if it's gonna, nah, it's okay. Here. Yeah, now I'm good. And this is kind of an introduction to designing for interactive data visualization. I know that a lot of you aren't at the level of coding where you're going to be making complicated D3 data visualization tools for people, but so this is less of a how-to than a thinking about the design side. Even the one I'm doing in New York that's going to be a little more hands-on than this has a bunch of, like, you don't have to code, but you have to think about the design. Like, if you're going to work with somebody who's going to build something for you, a lot of this is about thinking about the things that go into a good interactive visualization. And in the workshop, I'm doing things with sketching and actually designing out an application, but you're going to see the sort of the building blocks in this talk, like what it is you would think about if you were going to put together a design and work with a team to build something for your department or for users, okay? And so it's a lot of like eye candy, like state-of-the-art stuff that's cool and some things that work well, with only a couple of examples of things that screwed up a little bit. So it should be at least like a nice tour of the options out there if you ever get a budget to build something really cool. Let's put it that way. Okay. So I should have caught up with Chris a little bit about what you've done in this course so far, but just to sort of remind you about the general picture around data visualization. We usually start over sort of in the analyze interpret side where we've got a bunch of data in spreadsheets or in some horrible format like XML, and we have to figure out what's in it and what we're going to do with it for our clients, right? Or what we're going to build with it. And there's a kind of a cycle, and really there's errors all over the place because this isn't quite as neat as Gregor drew this. But you're looking for insights in that data that you can then visualize in some way and show off to people. And in the process of looking for those insights, you're also documenting what you've discovered, talking to your colleagues, doing things to sort of massage the data set, transform it in various ways, and visualize in a kind of ongoing loop. And usually, just like art projects are never done, data viz projects are never done either. You get to a point where this is like good enough, and you ship it essentially. Or you decide this is it, we're stopping, this insight is good enough for us, okay? So that's sort of the picture we're in, and I'm obviously gonna focus more on up at the top rather than the lower bits, which I think you've probably already talked about a bit, right? Okay. So you may or may not be familiar with this. This is a famous mantra in designing data visualizations that pretty much everyone who ever made anything with data that other people look at needs to learn this mantra. You have to actually like be able to recite this in your sleep. Everybody at any conference on visualization knows this by heart and says it in kind of a jokey, smiley way. Like, you always want to show an overview, offer zoom and filter controls, and then details on demand. At least that's the way it went in 1996, okay? There's more to it in the paper, but that's what everybody remembers and everyone says, okay? Now, in 2012, Ben Schneiderman worked with Jeff Hare at Stanford to update this and came up with some more principles. And this already, to me, feels a tiny bit dated, and I think it's a little bit because Ben, when he was working with Jeff on this, was thinking about building tools like Spotfire or Tableau. So tools that would help people build visualizations more than about an end-use visualization, like the kinds of things you're going to see today. So there are a number of good principles in here. I think there are also a few things that are missing, so I'm going to supplement a little bit. But, and we're not going to talk about every single one, but the ones we are going to talk about are in the red here. We're going to talk about visualizing data by choosing visual encodings, filtering, sorting, selecting, navigating, coordinated views, annotation, and some basic storytelling stuff. And I'm supplementing a little bit with some stuff from another more recent paper. Actually, I don't know, maybe Alice knows when this was. No, it's 2012 as well. This Elmquist et al. Paper that talks about sort of good design principles for often animated visualizations of the kind we're going to see, where the user gets sucked in and ends up in a state of flow. So we're going to talk about that at the end as well. So these are the things I'm going to hit on. The visual encodings, which I went over last year, and I'm going to briefly remind you about if you weren't there. Overview and zoom, sort and filter. I'm going to add in recast and rescale as related to sort and filter, which could probably use a snappier label. Details on demand. Coordinated views, annotation, storytelling, and this flow concept that I just mentioned before. Okay. All right. So visual encodings. Chris, did you talk about this at all? In this?
No, just to catch up. Like,
yeah.
Rahul did some, basic finished with basic visualizations using Seaborn and Matplotlib to look at the shape of the data.
Okay.
So
more tool like how to use the Seaborn and yeah.
Yeah. So you're perfect. This is
okay.
Perfect.
Super. All right. Yeah. So right. So I love Seaborn and IPython, so I'm coming from this background too, right? The interesting thing about all those tools, and any tool, like including Tableau or any tool that you use, including Excel charts, right, is you need to know what the best form for graphing your data is to communicate to the public, right? And there's this classic Cleveland-McGill hierarchy of perception from a paper. I should have put the citation of the paper, but I put the citation of the book I took the screen cap from, which is The Functional Art. Highly recommended book if you want to read more about designing interpretable and usable infographics. Now, the Cleveland hierarchy is talking about where it is that you can make accurate judgments about comparing things in a visual space. So up at the top, position on a common scale, essentially is the, bar charts are the best chart little image there, okay? And pretty much everybody in data visualization knows bar charts are the way that you're always going to show off differences between things in the clearest possible way. And I mean, right next to it, he has lollipops and dot plot type things, which are related. You're just looking at differences right next to each other, and you can tell very easily which one is higher and which one is lower. So if you're ever in doubt, bar charts are the way to go. Position on an unaligned scale is not as accurate for people to judge, but still they're pretty good. You can sort of tell that the ones on the left are taller than the ones on the right, and Length is essentially the same principle, but you're not on a scale. You're just looking at longness of things. Direction, people get a little less good at that. Angle, even worse, all the way down. So area is particularly bad because people get confused about radius versus area on things like round dots. So a lot of people, including Alberto Cairo, who wrote The Functional Art, think that these dot plots, the bubble plots that are everywhere, are terrible because people don't know how to read them. But they're very sexy and organic looking, and they're everywhere anyway. But just be aware of the issue with that. Volume, even worse. We aren't good at looking at 3D things in 2D. Curvature, pretty bad, but again, sexy and organic, so you see it a lot. Shading and saturation, definitely on the lower end. People have a hard time reading across these for differences. Okay, so bar charts, if you're ever in doubt, go with a bar chart. Although really quite boring. I don't think you're going to see that many bar charts today. Okay, so did Rahul hit on why pie charts are bad? We've essentially just established why pie charts are bad. This is the classic example of why they're bad. every business presentation has pie charts in it. They're easy to make in Excel. They're one of the top templates in almost every single charting library that there is. And people like them for various reasons. One is, again, round, organic kind of shape. Another is because they fit in a constrained space, so you don't have to worry about, like, you know, n bars taking up more room across the page. Instead, it's all just in one space. So it's easy to plan for that and to put it on your page. But, you know, I mean, maybe you can see where I'm going with this example, but those charts all look roughly the same, but actually if you do them as bar charts, you can see the differences, and that's the key point about people not being able to judge area and angle in the pie charts, but the bar charts show quite quickly. You can see what the bigger wedge is. Okay, so bar chart's good, pie chart's bad. On the other hand, this is a really good pie chart that showed up on Twitter the other day, and I think it's quite excellent. So they're not all bad. There are a lot of very fun examples of pie charts, including the pie I've eaten, pie I haven't eaten chart, which is a really good one for this time of year. Okay, so now we're going to get into fancy interactive stuff instead. But those are principles you start with, and then you get into doing things to show more complicated data. How do you reveal data when there's a lot of it? What do you show? So this is a current recent example that was in the New York Times that captures this sort of overview first and then zoom principle. Maps are particularly good at this kind of thing. There were these absolutely gorgeous, it's really washed out on the, I wonder if it's worth trying to change the resolution. I wonder if I change the brightness.
Yeah.
Does that actually work for me?
No.
It doesn't really do anything. Oh, wait. Yeah, maybe it did a little, because it's quite bright up there. It's totally dark on mine now. But. All right, let's see. It didn't really work. Oh, well. You guys can't see that doing anything, can you? No, it's the actual projector bulb. Never mind. All right, well, so this has lovely gradations, although someone recently critiqued the color gradation choice. But leaving that aside, you have these beautiful state maps of election results for Democratic versus Republican in the latest election. And they look like they're just pictures essentially, but they have this scaling and zooming option up here, and you can get into unbelievable levels of detail. And all of these little voting, what are they called? Precinct, thank you. Every single precinct is highlightable with a tooltip and a color, so that it's at every precinct across all of the states that were covered in this report, which was all of the ones that were up for grabs, basically. Beautiful work. Now, the usual principle with the overview first, zoom in, which is sort of the principle that Schneiderman always starts from, and particularly tool builders tend to start from that, but in the storytelling world online, sometimes it's good to start small and then zoom out. I don't know how many of you saw this. This is a pretty startling. So this is Derek Jeter retiring and how many swings, and essentially there's some narration on the side, and then we start to zoom out and try to visualize how many swings, practice swings, regular season swings, home runs. And so it becomes what's called a unit chart, where except that we're taking the little animation and turning it into the visualization of size to count everything. And then meanwhile, there's stuff happening to Jeter, like he's taking a break because he was tired of swinging postseason. So this is what some people call bottom-up instead of top-down visualization, which is a very effective storytelling technique, actually. And you're going to see some of these other principles like this scrolly telling, as Dominicus in Germany recently called it. And then you go into the article. So this is a common technique to get people sucked into whatever you're trying to say. Is you've got some story you want to tell, and you do some kind of interactive data visualization that draws people into the story. And in this case, starting from a small thing like the work it takes to get good at what you're doing, and then really tell that over a career. Right? Okay. So that's the zoom out from zooming in. Okay, so sorting and filtering. You've all seen sorting and filtering in various tools. Let me show you this one, just as a different interesting example. So this guy was looking at asteroids hitting from space, hitting the Earth. There have been a couple of interesting visualizations of this topic, actually. So I want you to notice that when it loads, wow, this is huge, the screen, the resolution's amazing. When it loads, you've got this timeline along the bottom for year of impact, and he's going all the way back to 1913. And it's got, obviously, a globe, which you expect is probably somehow manipulable, right? Because otherwise, what's the point? You can't see the back of it, right? It's got, over here, a little list of factoids. So sort of highlights about the data from whatever he's showing here. And then eventually you notice down here that there's just a little range here selected of, a few asteroid hits probably. So let me just play with that. If I were to expand the range that it covers all the way to, say, 1970, we see a lot more on the map. And you'll notice that these also updated. So that's now the biggest hit was actually 1976. So I just filtered by clicking on that. So I limit it to just that one. And now if I want to, I can figure out, because I know things about interactives online, that might be interactive. And there we are. Now, this is the only thing that I find a little dubious about this project. I'm going to go back to it in a second. He links to the actual database that he got his data from, and look how horrible it is. So there are a couple of other projects I'm going to show that do that, and in a way it's a good thing because it shows you the provenance of the data. It shows you that it's got a reliable data backend where you can go and get more details, and he didn't have to build all of that. And I forget if they have an API or if he scraped or like got a CSV from somewhere. But so this is nice, but it really is quite jarring to click on that and not know that you're going to leave the site and go back. So that's something I would actually say I'm not so sure about. But all right, now over here he has a reset filter. I'm going to do that. And now what's interesting, when I did reset filter, it turns out I've got, I think, the entire timeline selected. There's no yellow filter on here, but it's easy enough to get a filter back. Just scrape and drag in here. And I knew that because I get this cursor that looks different when I'm over this. This often means in the context of a timeline that I can like scrape and drag to select a range of data there. Okay, let me move it over here. So like this, there's this giant one right there. 23 metric tons, it's obviously bigger. I'm not going to click because it'll take me to that horrible other website. Okay, but then there's another filter mechanism that's interesting, which is like we could just look at the United States. And it does this nice animation to take you there. So we're going to talk about animation a little bit later, but I like this because it's one of those, you've got the Earth there, it's all there, right? Let's just, instead of having it blink and redraw, let's actually take you there in the data so you see where you're going. Look at this, there's one in the middle. This isn't, says that Hawaii? Yeah, because it says land in the United States. Okay, but also when I clicked on the country, it also filtered by country here, so we can see. This looks like it's the biggest one. No, 56 kilograms. Is that really the biggest one? Anyway, this is fun, except for the fact that you end up on that horrible site if you want to go find out more. So, all right, that's an example of a bunch of different filtering mechanisms for limiting the data and then seeing what you've got. Okay. This is a more mundane example that's a kind of a easier to do common trick for, and maybe even was overkill in the case of this particular project. I'm not going to show it, but basically you can barely see it because of the projector being so bright, but you've got a lot of faint lines, which are all the data in the data set. This is a common trick with lots of data on a line plot, is to do them very faintly, and then to show like the mean or the median in some kind of highlighted line that goes across all of them, and make it clear that that's not a single data point, it's a mean or a median. So that's the all jobs there, that's this yellow one. And then as you mouse over these, different lines highlight and get labeled, and you can see which line it is. But you can also click on one of them, and that sets that blue bar to basically be comparable to the others, so that it's also always highlighted. Now this is a little bit of an overkill for this project, because this is about like what hours people work during the day in the US, and this was on NPR. And in fact, there are only 2 jobs that are sort of outliers. There's this one, which is protective services like cops, and then I think it was food services. Like there's only 2 that aren't in the main curve here. And those could have, like if I were the New York Times, for instance, I probably would have like drawn them on here and then like labeled them right here, because they're out of the main group of the others, and so you wouldn't have had to click or roll over to actually see which ones they were. But so anyway, this is a kind of technique you can use where you roll over, you allow people to select it, and then they can compare it to others. It's a kind of filtering. All right, and this is a sorting example. This is a classic table sorting example. This was New York Times again, and it's just because they do really good work. I know a lot of people there. Sorry, you're going to see a bunch of New York Times in here. It's just the way this stuff works. Partly because they, since the guy who wrote D3, which is the library, the JavaScript library everyone's using, since he's at the New York Times, he's helped push the envelope and build tools to make these things more possible. So this is a cute example, because actually I'll just go to this one. It's not just because I am secretly fond of Excel, but maybe not so secretly in this group, I'm actually fond of Excel. But they did this thing where they're actually saying, they're talking about how Chicago public schools compare to others. So they leave Chicago, which is the comparison category or group, up at the top in yellow. And then, but these things are still all sortable. And they do this nice D3 animation when they do, so you can tell that something happened and like you notice that something's going on. And then you also get like a comparison, essentially. This is the line for Chicago, and then these are the ones that are higher than it. So it's a nice trick for showing. I mean, you could sort of fake this up in Excel too, but it would be a little harder. You'd have to set some top row and then make the others sortable under it or something. But basically, with that line going down the side, that yellow line, you get to see the comparison to the reference group up at the top. And I just sort of like it's funny, you can't see it at all, but this is gray. This is transparent, and there's gray underneath all of this. Projector is really bright. And you can even sort on these binary yeses and nos, where you can see what Chicago said. Okay. All right. Did you guys look at Tableau at all? This is a Tableau workbook example?
No, Ben Jones is coming here.
Oh, really?
February, March.
Okay, super. So I'm setting up Ben Jones for you. So I just wanted to show you Tableau, which has like a very nice academic licensing. And so I think some of you have used it in the past and have access to it, right? Tableau, when you build a workbook and put it up on the web with Tableau, you can give your users access to all sorts of filtering and sorting. So all of these columns here are just like the table we just saw, where you can sort by any of these columns, and you can turn on or off things to do filtering on the graph, and you can roll over the lines and zoom in on a particular item that way. So Tableau gives you all of that Excel-like stuff really, really easily. And then there are some libraries built on top of D3 that make it easier to build some of these things. And this is NVD3 that does kind of some, like I would say, is quasi-statistical plots. So this is a scatter plot with what's called a rug along the bottom, showing the density of each of the dot types. Did you talk about rugs? And you didn't? No, you're not doing.
Oh, you're like.
I'm it. All right.
Yeah,
Anyway. Okay. And anyway, so with this kind of component, frequently the way these components are built is that you can filter by turning on or off a group here. So in the NVD3, you can just like click to turn off group 0, and it actually rescales and shows you the new scale, et cetera, or group 3, for instance, which is pushing the scale up here. So this is a nice component that you don't have to do a ton of work to use. Okay, so since I just mentioned rescaling, one of the things I wanted to talk about, like this is a little distinct from scaling or sorting and filtering, but it's related. Some of the cooler interactive visualization examples do this thing where they let you look at the data in a different way. So the simplest example is something like a log scale switch. The log scale helps you stretch out things that are clumped together in some extreme. And so this is an example, which I probably didn't make clickable. It doesn't matter. But basically, there's a little toggle here, and we start in a logarithmic display so that there's like a nice zoom in effect on this data, whereas if this were a linear display, all of these planets would be squished together up the top, which is what happens when you click on that. If you guys want my slides, I'll make sure all the links are clickable. Yes, okay. Yeah, you should have the slides because all the examples are excellent to play with. And the other thing about this display, in the logarithmic display, you get to have annotations. So we're going to talk about annotations again later, but the point here is like we know what Earth is and why it's important, and Mars, we know about that. So we've labeled one so we understand, whereas these others, with whatever arbitrary names, we don't care about all of them. But having a label of the ones that we care about or know about, and like in worldwide data, often having a US label helps you sort of orient, like people that are better than us, people that are worse than us. Okay. So this is one type of rescaling. And then this is another kind of rescaling that's really reframing. This is very clever. This is another New York Times example. This is super clever. It combines several things in one, and it's a good example of storytelling too, so a lot of techniques here. Basically what they did is, here's the raw data for the September jobs report when this came out. This was, I think, this year. I think it was this year. And, no, it's 2012, sorry. And anyway, it looks like this. There's essentially raw data, right? There's a little bit of a summary up at the top. Number of jobs added, unemployment rate, okay. But then, I think this was Amanda Cox's idea, there's a toggle how a Democrat might see things, how a Republican might see things. So the how a Democrat might see things is essentially looking at the numbers differently. So here's another interpretation of the numbers with a sort of annotation explaining it. They focus on private sector job growth in their reporting. And then there's another really, really broad annotation. They don't usually do things that are this dramatic, like this giant arrow pointing at a point. They're usually subtler than that, but she was really trying to get a point across here. You too can do giant arrows pointing at things and say you saw it in the New York Times, right? And then how a Republican might see things. We're back to essentially what looked like the original job, but then there's a line there that's important. that comes from a Paul Ryan comment, and then there's this unemployment line as an annotation here. So reframing, same data. Okay, and then another thing, there are other kinds of like rescaling or reframing of data that happen. This is just a really brutally obvious grouping thing, but it's actually very clever. So let me show you, or at least I liked it. So this was in Bloomberg. Bloomberg Interactive team has done some really great stuff recently. So, all right, this was this year. So it's got a couple of things in it, including you've got like grouped data. So we've got things that rose, things that fell in unemployment, and then we've got state unemployment compared to U.S. And this is right before the election, so we're looking at comparing a bunch of things. Let me just show you. So those are teeny little cute tooltips that have the state. So this is Oklahoma versus the U.S. as a whole. Okay, so we start out in that view, and then when we click that, we animate into an actual scatter plot. So it's the same data, but looked at differently and animated so you can see that transition, that it's the same data points. And then you can still see that same rollover. So this is Nevada? No. Hawaii, I can't see. My screen is incredibly tiny. Idaho. There's Nevada. All right. And then what it means for governors, it's a different recategorization with other info going on in here. So there are a number of examples of this kind of regrouping stuff. I think I have another one in here too. But I like those as a trick with interactive stuff, and the animation really helps. Okay, so details on demand from the Schneiderman mantra. I feel like I should quiz you. What was the mantra? Details on demand is at the end of the mantra. All right, so the obvious way of thinking about details on demand in interactive space is tooltips. So like, don't downplay the role of a tooltip. This is a lovely project it's not very interactive, but the interactivity it had, this is in Popular Science. This is not like super interactive, but what it has is cool. So this is cocktails. And then if you roll over them, you get to see a whole lot of details, including the recipe, which I thought was so awesome. So this is like whiskey sour. And there's a beautifully formatted, beautiful tooltip, right? But meanwhile, there's also like, acid and sugar. So the Hemingway daiquiri is very acidic. I lost my tooltip. There's the Hemingway daiquiri. It's got grapefruit and lime, so I guess, and saline solution. Honeysuckle, that sounds so great. It's very sweet. Honey syrup, so there you go, and rum. Anyway, I really love this. It's unusual in its visual encoding, but interesting. Certainly interesting and eye-catching, and it has lovely tooltip content, so you want to spend time on it. Oh, green chartreuse, I didn't realize. This is because I was in Paris recently. All right, now I think I've convinced you already from what we were looking at before in Bloomberg. Tooltips can have charts too. This was one of my first ever tooltip examples with a cool chart in it. It's an entire map drawn in SVG and D3, like in the tooltip. It's super cool. This was something Pitch Interactive out in California did. It's got little icons and everything, and like these are generals and attacks and fatalities in Afghanistan that they were responsible for. It's really good. Okay, and then if you can have a little graph like that built out of D3 in your tooltip, you can also have interactive tooltips. So this is an amazing project. How many of you guys have seen this one? I don't know. Alice probably has, but So it starts out like this. It's so funny how many people in DataViz mention this project to me as something they'd like to build something like. So I'm going to show it to you in detail. It starts out with this like strange, eye-catching visual of things that look like line charts, but you can't make anything out of them, right? And then it's got a little bit of explanation, and then it wants you to scroll. When you start scrolling, it animates. This is scrolly telling, by the way. We're going to get to more of that. It animates, and you start to see like what's going on in this state. So this is us blowing it up so we can see that little pressed together line, right? And then you can also see annotations on things that are sort of interesting that we're going to maybe look at in more detail. But what I wanted to show you is this. So this is an entirely, like a teeny little chart with data that changes as I mouse over the chart. It's unbelievable. You can't see it, but right here is a light pink bar that's essentially the recession. Like it's covering the 2009 period. You can sort of see the lines here, but so basically you've always got like a reference point. Here's the recession, and then we can see this is internet publishing, broadcasting, and search. Things improving, right? Average salary going up. Boy, we know what jobs we should be in. Okay, and so that's you know, as we notice over here, this little graphic here, you'll see this in a bunch of other projects. I don't know if the New York Times started this first, but lots of people are using this now. This is a progress indicator for where we are in the scrolly story. So you'll see some others that have it. Now, there are a couple of other things in here, like in this little annotation chart over here, we've got like links. You're going to see this in some other projects too, but this says like fast food, and then it highlights over here the fast food line and the little chart. Okay. So you can basically read the recap of what's going on, but then also like narrow in on those details, get the detail to show up by mousing over the bits of it, or just do it yourself. Okay, I'm going to go through the rest of this because some of the other examples in it are good. So we do the medical economy, housing bust, which is all below the line here. Manufacturing in America sucks. Oil and gas extraction, things going up pretty well in the US. Oil and gas operations. The digital revolution. Electronic shopping and auctions. Okay. All right, and then after we've gone through that, then we do this adorable animation where we now see what are called small multiples. We're going to see that later, but basically that's look at the little teeny tooltip chart of every single line that was up there by group so that you can compare them all at a glance and see that like oil and gas pipeline construction is up, and so is power communication systems construction, but not all the others in construction, right? And the color coding really helps you see the difference there, the yellow, orangey stuff versus the green. So there's a lot of very good visual and interactive design in this. Okay. Not to mention development excellence. Okay. So details on demand, the tooltip is a powerful, powerful tool. Tooltips can include, though, this is one of the couple of examples of things I don't love in this deck, but Pew Internet, the Pew, whatever they are, you know, the Pew, they collect data about America and they're a nonprofit. They've been beefing up their interactive design, and they've got this one that's it's sort of marriage market, women, single men, single women, percent who are single across the country, and they have a map. And it's a classic problem with interactive maps. They need to put the tooltip or the thing that shows up when you mouse over a state inside the map area, which is this small window here. And the place they put it is in the Northeast, so we can't actually mouse over very successfully anything in our part of the world because the tooltip's in the way. somebody on Twitter actually criticized this. I'm like, oh, there's a good example of bad tooltips. So small multiples. We just talked about small multiples briefly. Here's another cool example from Periscopic, a design agency in Portland. This is the small multiple as the navigation device. So this is something they did, World on Terror. They have these sort of interesting graphics. Notice when you first load the page, you get a how to read this. This is common for things that are slightly unusual. There's usually a little key or a legend somewhere in a well-done interactive that'll help people understand it. But for things that are unusual, you really want to have something quite in their face saying how to interpret it, right? So these are little graphics for different terrorist organizations, I guess. It's clearly terrorist organizations. And this is years of activity with number killed. This is wounded and this is killed. Okay. And the way this works, there are these little graphics that are the small multiples that sort of show the shape of the data for each terrorist organization. There's a tooltip with some summaries. Then if I click on it, it actually uses it to load the view over here with the details of that data. So it's a selector that's like a navigation device. And then if I go over here, I get more details. Like I can actually mouse over by year. And the other thing it's showing me is up here, the region of the world where the organization is based. So country of origin is this is not a good example. Oh, that's the same one. Here. Yeah, this is the Tamils in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka, at the tip of India, is outlined in a dark color, and then the places where they've been associated with killings or terrorism are in gray on that map. So this is acting as a navigation device to take you to these places. They also have these bookmarks here, and that resorts these little thumbnails. So you can see longest active is the Basques, which I was surprised by. And I also didn't know the Basques had been active in Mexico, which I find just super surprising. So recent activity, Al-Qaeda, most victims. Okay, it's like so tiny on my screen. So now notice this, the scale is just like out of control on this one. It is touching this other one. They handled that by fading out the long extreme lines on this thumbnail. You can't really tell on this because it's such a bad display. Actually, you can see it. Something to do with the colors. Whereas if I mouse over it, I can see the faded out things come clear. Okay, so lots of good things in this. Okay, and you get the point of small multiples letting you see everything at a glance and compare. Like I can't see it all if it's all on the same graph, but I can see it if they're all next to each other and it's grouped in some way that's important. Okay. This is another beautiful example about wood, like moisture content in wood with some scientific data, where the small multiples along the bottom are acting as a navigation device and also a comparator. If I click on one, like this one, that's the data I see there, moisture content, and then I can roll over these and it'll compare to the one that's selected. Okay. This was made by Luis Carli, who's actually local now. I got him a job at my startup, actually. Okay, and then we saw this. So in this the economy and recession chart we were just looking at, we went through the like scrolly telling story of different sectors in this data. And then at the bottom, we got the small multiple display at the end so that we could just look at it right that. So there was a bit of theatrics of walking through the main points that they wanted to show at the top, and then you get down to the small multiple organization where you can see them next to each other. And they did that because obviously in the theatrical animation display, it's hard to compare them right next to each other. You don't see all the little graphs unless you mouse over everything. Okay, so that's the one we just saw. All right, so coordinated views. So this is something that's now like it takes a little bit more programming, but it's now entirely feasible with modern web technologies to have the mouse on one chart change what's showing in another chart, right? So in this case, this is, so there's actually like gray under all of these, which you can't see. It doesn't matter, the main point is here, which is that as I mouse over any one of these, it changes the year shown on all of these and changes where the highlight is on all of them. So I don't have to, like, my mouse doesn't have to be everywhere. They're all linked to each other. Okay. This is another classic example, cross-filter, where I can drag and select on all of these little charts, and it filters this giant table down below and changes what you see. So the table itself is linked to those and vice versa. Okay. All right, MBTA Viz. How many of you guys saw this? MBTA Viz. Ooh, you're in for a surprise. This was genuinely one of the best things of the year. It made a lot of people's best of lists, and it's unbelievably rich. So these guys are local. MBTA data, they got a dump of like 3 lines of data. So first I want you to notice, I'm going to make you look at this several times because it has so many cool things in it. This is like a little animation of actual trains at this time. So trains on the line, right? That's before you even get to. So the first, it looks sort of boring. Unfortunately, they aren't journalists. They did this for a class project, and they just kind of went to town on it. But like, it starts with just a table of numbers, and if it weren't for that animated thing, you might leave the page. And then also after this next thing, you might leave the page. And no, there's more. So, all right. What was my point about this one? It was small multiples still. Let me just make sure. Oh, no, coordination, super. There's so much in this project, it's like impossible to. Yeah, so, all right. So this is a Mary diagram. This is a slightly unusual old-fashioned display of, that was used for train timetables. And they did it for the subway, which makes perfect sense, right? So these are stations. So this is Alewife, and all along here, you get, like as you highlight, you see different stations, all right? And so this is time is going down from 5:15 a.m. to whatever, and these are all trains. But so this is what I mean about linked visualizations. So as I mouse over these lines, that's a train, and it's highlighted over there. And everything is highlighting, everything is updating in this little display as I do that. There's a highlight on the line, and then that train is also. And you're like, oh, that's a pretty cool project. And then you keep scrolling through this project, and you can't even believe it. Okay, but so some of the other things they did here, they have little inline links to things that are interesting. And it scrolls you to that part of the display. Also, you know, with the Mary display, you can see things like these kind of like bunched up lines, which will show you where there was some kind of a problem on the line, like a train got delayed and it backed up others or something. And so your eye really sees these quickly when there's a disconnect like that. And they put little like annotations, just New York Times style, about stuff going on here. After the morning rush hour subsides, everything runs smoothly throughout the middle of the day. So that's actually a call out that there's nothing unusual happening, but given that it's in a long stretch of nothing, that's fine. And then you start seeing stuff going on, and this is fantastic. This is a disabled train, and they actually like draw a line explaining what happened here with this disabled train. Service stops at 6:20 p.m., so there's a blank column here. Like to this station, you can't get to it because service stopped. There's another disabled train. And then here we are, this is the middle of the night. And what's interesting here is they could see trains being moved between stations. So this is like, there's a gap in the data, but there's still interesting things in it, and they can call out what that is, because somebody looking at that is going to go, what the hell, is that a bug in your data? Actually, it's not. It's something actually going on. They checked with the MBTA operators to, like they made this project and then told the MBTA about it, and the MBTA when they presented it recently at a DataViz meetup. The MBTA guys were there, and that was almost more interesting than the presentation, hearing them respond to this. They basically said, I'll just give you the gist, like one of the guys there has a master's degree in transportation or operations or something, and he said, you know, we study all of this in school, so we know about things like moving trains in the middle of the night, or, you know, capacity problems, doors having to close faster to prevent people getting on when they're too loaded, all of this stuff. They had all these stories, right? But we never look at it this way. We never actually see it. And that they said that these guys, Brian and Mike, had essentially like inferred a whole bunch of things from just the data in their file. That were accurate, and you know, things like I think they found like a snow thing at some point. Anyway, there's a whole lot of linked stuff in their data. Let me. Almost everything is interactive and linked in their display. Like here, this is what I meant about you keep scrolling down and there's more, yet there's more. So you can see like congestion stuff going on here, right? Because over there it's animating. And they've always got these little like helper things. So as you like mouse over stuff, you find out stuff about how it works. It's super. Anyway, we're gonna come back to that. Highly recommended. They added some green line data recently too. All right. This is, I don't want to go too late, but this is how Scotland voted. This has a problem that is classic in linked displays. So this is my other example of things that can go wrong when you do this. Chris, when do I have to shut up for sure?
Wait, and you can go as long as you want, but till 5 was the, I think.
Okay, I can not spend too much time. All right, so this has a nice sortable table down below. And as I mouse over a row in the table, I can see the, what are they called? They're not precincts, county or whatever in Scotland highlighted. But because it's a big table, you can get into the situation where you're paying attention to the table and you can't see what's up here. And it's even more pronounced for Orkney and Shetland because they're way up at the top. So they can easily, like if I do this, Orkney is the highlight. Shetland is like way up here, and okay, but that happens to be on the screen. Anyway, you can see the problem because it's vertical. This is a big issue. Have to be careful in your design. Side by side is better. All right, annotation. We've already talked about annotation a bit, so I don't have to spend too much time on this, but Amanda Cox has said famously several times, when you're doing a news story, you don't just say, here's a bunch of data. We hope you find something interesting in it. And that's the principle for doing a good design as well, right? You want to make sure you focus people on the things that are interesting that you found for them, and then maybe give them an opportunity to explore themselves afterwards in some kind of nicely directed way. So we've already seen a ton of examples of call-outs of interesting things in the data. This we just talked about, right? They labeled things that were interesting and explained what was going on. This is, the New York Times does this all the time. They'll have, so this is side-by-side map and data, and I believe these are linked too, but then like the extremes, they label the extremes with some kind of explanation, very common for them. So don't be afraid of text is sort of the bottom line on this, and Alberto Cairo says that all the time in the functional art book as well. You shouldn't be afraid of using text in your information visualization. We saw this too. So Amanda, you know, annotated with what the takeaway message might be for the different parties in this. Okay, storytelling. So storytelling is this super hot topic. Some of us are getting tired of it. But it's obviously important if you're going to try to walk people through a finding, right? And like we saw with the Derek Jeter case, that was something where you start from a tiny thing and turn it into a story by thinking about the ramifications, like how much did he have to practice, over how long, how many bat swings is that, you know, his poor rotator cuff, all of that, right? These are some mechanisms that can help with designing for storytelling. Personalization, bookmarks and steppers, we've seen a couple already. Animation, we've seen some of that, and scrolly telling, which we've also talked about. But personalization, so this is a common technique that's pretty powerful. I think people have documented that you get more like time on page if you do this kind of approach to a project. So this is the acronym for Choose Your Own Adventure, but basically, you know, ask a little quiz like, who are you and who else lives with you, and then you'll get data tailored to you, like what your tax burden is or how you compare to the rest of the country. Compared to other groups, a higher proportion of blacks live in single female households. That's sort of depressing. Greatest number of these households have incomes under 30,000. That's very depressing. But then, you know, you can add people to the family and see what happens. You know, go back to couples or whatever and see where you stand. This is a great project. I'm going to try to show this briefly. This is something that the OECD Better Life Index, which some friends of mine worked on and keep working on every year. Basically, it allows you to define what's important to you, like create your own Better Life Index. Do you care about housing? Do you care about income? And as you change these sliders to weight things, these country displays change so that you can see which ones more closely match your weight of the values. Okay. You can tell I already cranked up life satisfaction, work-life balance. I'm surprised the United States is so high in this. And then I can see a nice little tooltip for the United States. And then something they've added is, actually that's if I, Alice, do you remember how to get to the map display on this? No. I have to admit, so their work is super, but within the context of this website, I'm frequently confused. Yeah, okay. So later they added this. After having the little flowers, they added this, this is what people in these different countries said was important to them, which is cool. It's like a reflection on the data later. So, okay, that's interesting. So I was not the only one who cranked up life satisfaction in the US. I am not alone in that. Whereas in France, health was the highest rated topic. That's actually quite surprising to me. And you see cute little animations and ordering, tons and tons and tons of detail in this project. So compare France to Germany. So comparing France to Germany, you see certain things are ranked differently. In France, income matters less than in Germany. All right. Anyway, super cute, and the fact that you get to see, like, after you set up your own rating, then you can go see what the impact is, like how you differed from your country in your ratings. It's very cool. Okay, bookmarks, steppers, etc. So this is another one of these sort of grouping and sorting things. New York Times. So okay, animated bubbles. We already talked about how bubbles are bad for various reasons, but people like them, and then when they bounce around like they're full of helium, people like them even more. This project had a lot of impact. But it's cool for lots of reasons, not just because it's round things bouncing around. But anyway, they have, this is what the New York Times used to call a stepper, although in this case it really might be more of a menu. But it's a common thing in the New York Times to have views that are interesting. So we found views and then we walk you through them, right? So this is spending, and then this is type of spending, and it splits it. So this is in a way regrouping. And then there's some annotations along the side. And then changes in the budget, and it animates into another line chart or a dot chart across what's this across? I forget what the x-axis is here. And then a grouping by department total. And all of it animates to sort of show you the relationship between the views. A lot of it's eye candy, but and especially the fact that like this is gigantic in Health and Human Services. And it's sort of occluding things here. But this kind of animated stepping thing is a common technique for telling a story. Okay. This was another stepper. They had, and it kind of is a manual scrolly telling. They had this long map of the hurricane path from whatever it was, a year ago, 2 years ago? I have no idea anymore. And each of these little scroll to locations moves the map down and shows you the annotation at that point with some of the impact. Okay. This was a zoom in on the Benghazi attack on the embassy there. And you can see here, like they have these little dots showing you sort of the status as you walk through it, and then an arrow to go to the next one. So that's like kind of a manual next stepping story. And then those are annotations on the map, obviously to make you focus in on what's important. So in a way, this is like a slideshow, except I think the map was more interactive than that. All right, and then we saw these guys already. They did all these annotations here. It turns out that they have a cooler thing, which is that when you mouse over their actual highlighted, like linked words, it not only takes you to that point on the graph, but it actually fades out everything else and highlights just that one thing. So it's really easy to see the point for the annotation. All right, animation. We've already seen a whole bunch of it, but here's another couple of examples. So I wanted to show you this because, like the Derek Jeter example, small data is often more interesting to people, like a single data point, if you look at it slightly sped up over time. This was a really cool project where a guy got taxi logs, and it's a day in the life of a New York taxi. And what you're looking at is sort of an animation of the taxi moving around. He's got no one in the cab now. That's an empty taxi. And then picks someone up and drops someone off, picks someone up, drops someone off, wanders around. And this is the day, so starting at midnight. And then a running total of what he's picking up. So it's super cool because it gives you a kind of a view of what it's like to be a taxi driver and time in the car versus income, and the sort of floating around the horrible back ends of Brooklyn, and then desperately trying to find someone at 4 a.m. It's just like so depressing. Like parts of the day are horrible. I think I can, yeah, so you can actually speed him up. Let me speed him up because I want you to start seeing. They don't show, in this project, he doesn't show like miles covered, wow, or airport, LaGuardia. Doesn't show, yeah, that hopeless, I have to find someone at the airport, oh, I didn't. Where is he going? Oh no, he went to the other airport. He failed at LaGuardia, so he went to JFK. I mean, this is so depressing, right? I bet he got somebody. I guess because it's a big fare if you go from an airport, it maybe made it worth it, and he succeeded in that case. But what a horrible, horrible trip. So anyway, yeah, this starts to fill in, and then what I found suspicious, like you can load another taxi, and I looked at a couple of taxis, and I was surprised. Like some of them were just like sitting around doing nothing for hours in the middle of the day. I was like, what the hell? So, all right. Yeah, all right, hang on, I'll kill it. You get the point. Very cool. Okay, and this, the periscopic gun visualization, this uses animation. This is, how many of you guys have seen this? Have you seen it? Yeah, Chris has. This was a couple of years ago. They made it in 2010 and updated it in 2013. But what it does is it uses animation at the beginning to explain the data, to explain the visualization itself. So it's a slowish animation, which I forget. I don't think they give you a way to skip it. But it's essentially a hypothetical. It's kind of an art project, a hypothetical of like, this person was killed at this age, and then you look at the volume of data. So animation used to make an emotional point, but also at the beginning, slow used to explain the visualization, like what they're doing. And then, after going through this animation, it's then interactive in various ways. You can filter in certain ways and look at like age group, sex, etc. I'm not gonna. Oh, right. So this is like the asteroid thing. So back to Providence, they linked to some source of the data, which is pretty cool. She had to do a ton of cleaning up of data to get this to work, because a lot of places don't report gun deaths in a good way or useful way. Okay, right. All right, now this is another good scrollytelling thing that happened this year. Oh, I think I didn't make it a link. Oh, my God. Okay. Right, so Anna Flagg made this, and it uses scrollytelling really nicely. It's not long. So you start going through this, and then she animates in the data in a kind of gratuitous way, but it sure catches your eye. And as you keep going through this, like, it walks you through the story, and then the visualization changes. So this is animation showing time passing and sort of data accreting on here. And then notice what happened there. So she goes through that whole animation of filling in the toxin health effects from fracking in Southern California. And then at the end of it, shows you a tooltip on one of the biggest data points. So essentially, she's illustrating in that, with the end of that animation, how the UI works too, and what else is visible in the data. So then you can move around and select another one and see what the toxins released at that point are. And then this is another example, a little bit like the Jeter one, where we start from that and then we zoom out to all of California with the threat of possible fracking in the rest of California and what that means. That, there are a lot of places that could be subjected to the toxins released from fracking in the water there. Okay. All right. So we talked about scrollytelling generally, all of these walking you through the story as you scroll. This is lovely, but I'm going to skip it. This is, it was just all over Twitter recently because he submitted a project to OpenBizConf, the one that I am co-chair of, and I looked at his project and was like, this is awesome. And so a lot of people passed it around. Notice he's using exactly the same thing that the New York Times uses for his stages of this scrollytelling. This is a project that looks at the difference in color words in Chinese and in English with beautiful animations and groupings of the data and stuff. So it's really lovely. Okay, and we talked about this, the zoomy-telling. There is no reason that a scroll couldn't also have been a zoom. This is a sort of a toy someone reminded me of today. But essentially, you just keep zooming. Instead of scrolling, you zoom, and more detail and data comes in as you scroll or as you zoom. It's totally cheesy, but the effect of walking through levels of detail and getting to these bigger and smaller things is pretty cool, actually. There are a couple others like this, like there's a Tree of Life example that's actually better, where you keep zooming in on little bits of the Tree of Life to get to new organisms. Okay, also this has gratuitous music with it, which is horrible. It's not good enough to need a Radiohead soundtrack. All right, so we talked about flow at the beginning. This is just something I was thinking about as I was going through a lot of these examples. So flow, if you haven't heard of it, is it's sort of a psychological principle that was popularized by this guy, this Hungarian guy whose name is roughly pronounced Csikszentmihalyi, but I'm not good at that. Anyway, he has a book called Flow, and it's about being involved in an activity to the point where you forget about what you're doing and lose your sense of self and get completely involved in that activity. He says here, the ego falls away, time flies, everything, you're poetically involved in the thing that you're doing. And people have likened good gameplay to being in a state of flow, playing a computer game in particular. But then other people have adopted it and tried to talk about application design with respect to this. And I was trying to think of examples that I think InfoBiz projects that induce that sort of flow where you're just buried in the application looking at data and involved, and there's always something new to click on. I didn't necessarily get that far. I do think that these guys with the MBTA Viz were pretty amazing at getting you involved because everything is clickable and linkable and highlightable. Everything is alive. So like from this view, I can click and expand and get another layer of detail under it and click and roll over things. Like, I mean, people who looked at this and didn't click around missed 90% of this project because everything is alive. You know, I think somebody who is working on a concept of flow as opposed to web design, or at least product design, talked about differences in flow states, like experiential, where you're just buried in some kind of fun activity, and task-directed, where you're actually looking at something or trying to get something done. And it's true that those might be two different things. I think that, you know, for us, most of the time, we're not up in that flow category. We're either in the control, trying to use a tool to get something done, but we're aware that we're doing that and we're not really engaged in it. Versus anxiety, where we don't know what we're doing, where you have to look up the syntax, we don't remember how to do, we have to go to Stack Overflow, or we have to go to the help manual. And probably also in worry, like, am I going to finish it on time? Can I do it? So, yeah, where are we? I think this is the closest thing. When I was thinking about things that I've played with where I had to finally close the tab because I couldn't stop playing with them, this is one. And this seems something librarians would like. I think it's awesome. Honestly, it was one of my favorite things this year. This guy in Germany has a grant or a project to basically look at the Internet Archive's book, like all the books in the Internet Archive, which are, you know, old, like, open source books. And they have cataloged all the images in all of these books. And he's trying to figure out ways that people can browse and look at this giant data set, right? And he started from looking at the book subjects and mapping them, and he documents what he did over here, and it's certainly worth reading. But the end result, at least in this prototype, is this giant zoomable subject layout where you can go in and out and see related subjects near each other in space, or not. Hang on, it's really small on my screen. Yeah. All right. And then, so you can see things that were near each other in the tagging in the archive. And there are also a few layout errors that have to do with the algorithm used to lay out the subjects in space. But then when you highlight them, you get some kind of a tooltip that says something about the subject and the number of images that are in the archive. And then if you click on it, you can actually go and look at the images in Flickr and get lost for hours and hours and hours. So, I mean, it's all old stuff, which I happen to like. So if you're into old images in books, this project will destroy you. Don't spend any time on it when you're supposed to be working. So, I mean, that's an example where I wasn't that upset about the going to a new site, although I still wish that the interface had it load in page instead of going to Flickr, but they needed a place where they could store huge numbers of images, and Flickr was willing to do it. So, and it does, at least Flickr has this like fetch on scroll thing, so it never sort of stops. You don't get the having to load another page with a next button. You actually just get it like this. So super cool work from Mario. And then I think Pinterest is the other thing. It's not technically a data viz tool, but maybe it is, right? I think recommendation tools are the best at this because they have that, the well-designed ones have that characteristic of here's a thing and here's other things like it, which is a thing that a lot of text engines have, Amazon has, Pinterest definitely has it. Pinterest is one of those things I have to just shut down because I'm not going to do anything but Pinterest if I start it. So it's that it never ends. And Netflix too used to have that, like people who favorited this or added this to their queue, here's ones that are like it, but that's that recommendation engine thing. So I apologize for the giant whirlwind of many, many projects, but there's another paper online that has examples of sort of more low-level technical stuff about some of the interactive examples we saw. It's a little bit out of date. The projects I put up are like a better reference. But if you have any questions or comments or what to do next or examples of other types of things you'd like to know about, I have lots of them saved on Pinterest. Yes? Yeah.
And it occurred to me when you were showing the lifestyle, like countries where that might match how you rate certain scales.
Yeah, the OECD. Yep.
And it's really interesting to see data visualized in all these different ways, but then I started asking myself, well, where is this data coming from? Like, what does it actually mean? So in that specific example, who's reporting it? It sounded like it was self-reported from some survey, but where did that come from and who was reporting it? It's easy to get, I feel like it's easy to get swept away.
Yeah, and the sort of fun side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the OECD is a legitimate organization that collects data and has good data provenance and documents their stuff. So you can look on their site for the limits or the barriers between their data and the collected from users, who said things like you. As I understand it, those visualization projects that I was showing are an attempt to bring people in to engage with the data and play with the data, and this collect data and like personalize it is part of the sort of gimmick hook for that. Yeah. Yeah, I think I would highly recommend you go to the OECD site and read the documentation around those projects. They definitely hired people who care a lot about the statistical validity of what they're doing and the line between well-collected, curated data versus, user submitted. So,
It's like a cardinal rule, it seems. I mean, you can correct me on it. I've seen online people get slammed for not citing their data and
the source. Yeah. In many of these projects, certainly all of the reputable, like New York Times, Bloomberg, or whatever, they have a provenance line at the bottom of the interactive. So they have the who did it, like who made it, Mike Bostock or whatever from New York Times, and then they have data source and often some more footnotes if they massaged it or did things to it in some way that they think are important to show. So, yeah. And on the OECD site, it'll be there. It'll be documented in some way what the limits of that are.
And I like this project, Plotly. Alex, what's his last name? He just recently spoke at a conference and showed Plotly, and they do a great job of doing that as well. Some of the other stuff you saw, like the playing around, like actually playing with the data a bit more, but with, the data provenance is really shown.
I started to show Plotly and I took it out. It's a tool more than a...
Yeah.
I mean, it's a tool for you essentially upload your data to their servers and then you get all these interactive charts and allow you to zoom and filter and highlight. And so, and then, if you have a Plotly object embedded on some website, you can then get the data and get back, because it's all there. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess it's like the other side of the story.
No, it's completely legitimate question, and anyone who's like doing rigorous data visualization is going to be super worried about whether they understand the data and are doing transformations that are acceptable, whether it's good data and is showing what they think it's showing, and yeah, there's a back and forth with the data source people and the data interpretation people. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Totally different question, but so much of this good stuff is coming from New York Times. How many people are working at do that?
They have this giant, it's a commonly asked question. They have a giant graphics staff, and not all of them do interactives, but they've beefed that up quite a lot. It may be, but the graphics staff, like I said, includes the static graphics people too, so people who make maps and just regular bar charts in the paper. 20 to 30 was the last I heard. They invested heavily in that team because it's important to them to get people on their sites looking at their stuff, and these things are often hooks to read the article, and they've tracked that. They know that people come in through these shared projects that are beautiful.
I helped work on a 2-day conference we had on data viz here at Harvard this year, and so I forget who said it, but one of the presenters said that he thought that for academic journals, the graphs and the charts used to be better because there used to be a graphic designer with the journal who would, they'd give them the data and they would make something for them now. And now there's this assumption that there's so many tools out there that you should just do that part yourself too. And not all of those people are good at the visualization part of it. So that was something that people were talking about a little bit.
Wait, which journal did you mean?
I forget which journal he was talking about, but there were people tended to agree with him. You know, it was this whole little conversation that went on.
Yeah, I think that any reputable place that knows the work that goes into making these would never say that. They would say, oh, the problem is that to make these you have to be a D3 programming expert in JavaScript, which is actually true.
Yeah,
So
this
is
was
a problem.
They were being asked to do their own, whoever, if you remember, Chris, you were there, it's somebody who had been doing this for a long time and basically now was being asked to provide his own graphs and charts, whereas they used to be created for whatever journal he was doing the articles for.
Hmm.
You totally know him.
Yeah, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
it's certainly not Gabriel Florid, because
No, it's not.
he's an
Yeah.
expert.
And I just took it as it was an economic decision on the journal's part more than anything else, trying to get staffing.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, and it's actually, for any
It wasn't because they didn't
real newspaper or magazine, that's not the way they work, because they have a style guide for these things, and so normally, if the person had to do it themselves, they'd certainly have to obey the style guide, which has built into it all the rules around like not having dark grid lines over your chart so that things look good and aren't readable. So it's not that simple, is it? Yeah, I wonder who it was. That's horrible. And even like Excel, like since I teach Excel to people who don't know Excel sometimes, like no one knows how to do that to make good charts. Like I have to help the CEO of my startup client use Excel because he doesn't know how to use it, right? Which, like, that's shocking. Any other? Yep.
I think it's a bit like the early days of desktop publishing when friends who were graphic designers who were trained suddenly found people getting a hold of PageMaker or Quark and having 9 million typefaces.
Yeah.
And colors and
Yeah,
going whole hog.
that's true.
And, without any design principles or concepts, and I think you do need to have training in presentation.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's not just sort of esoteric art things. They're practicalities like the science of color contrast,
Yeah, exactly.
readability of type.
Yeah. It's also true. I was going to say, like, to the flip side of this, that there's the phenomenon that, like, I didn't show you a lot of bad interactive graphics. I showed you a couple of FUBARs from, like, NPR or whatever, but because anyone who knows some JavaScript can whip up one of these things, you see a lot of really, really bad stuff out there in interactive land, too, because they don't have design background and know the principles for making good ones. So exactly that. But from the computer science side. Yeah. Any other comments, questions, observations?
I was gonna add that, so on the site, we do have, some blog stories, some notes and slides from Lynn's previous classes.
Yeah.
And so some more information about just the basics of
Yeah.
visualization.
Actually, I'm going to do some horrible self-promotion right now, which is just because I know you guys might be interested. On my blog, like a couple of weeks ago, I did a post about text visualization things that I thought were interesting that were recent. But I'm going to have to look for it. Yeah, I mean, this is a good, so Chris, I almost was going to talk about this, but I didn't have time to put together a talk on it. So this was like recent text analytics and viz work that it seems like librarians would probably like this. So stuff on topic modeling that's cool. And this project I just showed by Mario with the internet. Some other stuff, like links to some stuff, some pretty things for doing things with literature that I thought were great. So that you might find interesting. I can send out the link.